Hey guys, tonight we slip into the cool breath of the Ethiopian highlands, where the air feels thin, ancient, and just a little enchanted. You can almost taste the morning mist on your tongue, and for a second you're not entirely convinced you're still in your room. Somewhere far below, you imagine faint drums carrying across valleys so deep they seem carved by giants. Yeah, welcome to Ethiopia Before Independence, a place where the ground itself feels like it has a memory longer than your sleep schedule. And trust me, with cliffs this tall and kingdoms this old, you probably won't survive this journey without at least pretending you know how to climb mountains. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is, where you're watching. I love seeing this little bedtime crew scattered across the planet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a narrow trail cut into the shoulder of a mountain. Every step crunches on red volcanic soil, and the low sun warms your face just enough that you don't notice the subtle chill sweeping up from the valley. As you walk, you sense the land shifting with ancient terraces, carved stones, even the faint outlines of rock churches hidden like secrets. It's Ethiopia's highlands awakening beneath your feet. Thousands of years of humanity pressing upward through the earth. Somewhere ahead, a shape rises from the horizon, a cluster of huts, smoke drifting upward through holes in their thatched roofs. People moving quietly in the early light. You wander in, pretending you totally understand the social norms. You do not. Children giggle at your confused nodding, and an old woman hands you a bowl of something warm and suspiciously thick. You drink it anyway. It tastes like grain and determination. This is a glimpse of one of the earliest agrarian communities in the region, long before kings or monuments. A mainstream historical fact. People here developed some of the world's first terraced farming systems, sculpting hillsides into layered steps that trapped precious water. You run your fingers along one of the terraces and imagine how many generations shaped it. Farmers who woke before dawn, whispered thanks to their ancestors, and worked until the mountains themselves seemed to breathe with them. You continue uphill, your legs burning a little. Don't worry, we'll call it exercise, to make you feel better. The air thins as the world stretches into rolling plateaus, dotted with giant lobelious plants that look like succulents on growth serum. A herd of sleek cattle passes, their horns curving elegantly like natural sculptures. You catch a whiff of something earthy and slightly alarming. Congratulations, you just walked through ancient cow territory. A quirky tidbit. Long before hair care brands got involved, some communities in the region used butter as a type of protective hairstyling product. Yeah, actual butter, smoothing and shielding the hair from the sun. You picture yourself trying it, slipping around like a living pastry, and decide maybe you'll stick with shampoo. The trail shifts from soft earth to polished stone, and suddenly you see it. A tall, slender stele rising into the sky like a finger pointing at the gods. It's carved with little windows, door frames, and patterns that mimic an entire multi-story building. You walk slowly around its base, trying to imagine the effort it took to carve and transport something this massive without cranes, forklifts, or that one friend who always helps you move furniture. Historians still argue whether these monumental stones served as markers for royal tombs, symbolic palaces for the dead, or something else entirely. You tilt your head at the intricate carvings, like you're a scholar weighing in on the debate. But deep down you're thinking it looks suspiciously like a giant stone apartment complex. Wind whips through the steely fields, carrying whispers of the kingdom of Demount, one of the earliest known political entities in the region. You feel the subtle shift from scattered communities to the beginnings of organized power. Leaders rise, alliances form, and you sense the early pulse of a kingdom learning to stand tall in a world where strength meant survival. As you move, your steps syncing with the heartbeat of the land. You picture traders trekking across vast deserts toward these very mountains, caravan lines brimming with incense, gold, salt, and fabrics. The region's early inhabitants didn't just wait for the world to come to them. They pushed outward, forging networks long before GPS or the miracle of Find My Phone. Another joke slides in as you imagine one ancient merchant checking his non-existent wristwatch, muttering, "If this camel doesn't speed up, I'm giving it a 1-star review." The sun climbs higher, washing golden light across the landscape. You feel history thickening in the air. Not heavy, just dense like walking through fog made of stories. Your fingers graze the rough bark of wild olive trees, and you taste the dryness on your lips as you ascend toward a crest that opens into a sweeping vista. Below lies a sprawling valley, green and brown and ancient as time. You kneel at the edge, sensing how early peoples built their lives around these natural fortresses. High ground meant safety. Fertile pockets meant survival. These highlands weren't just scenery, they were strategy, identity, protection. You breathe in deep, almost expecting to smell the smoke from fires lit thousands of years earlier. In a strange way, you do, memory clinging to the land like dust. As you move forward, guided by instinct, curiosity, and maybe a questionable sense of direction, you follow a group of travelers winding along the hillside. Their braided hair glints in the sunlight, their steps steady and sure. You match their pace, pretending you're a local even though your footing screams tourist. They carry bundles of grain and pottery, symbols of a society perfecting agriculture, pottery making, and early metal. Wheat at step. You feel the transformationless clusters, turning into structured communities, traditions deepening into shared identities. One younger traveler flashes you a grin, perhaps amused by your awkward mountain swagger. You grin back, fully aware that your legs are beginning to tremble. It's not the altitude, you mutter to yourself. It's the history, totally the history. The trail slopes downward, guiding you into the cradle of emerging civilizations, precursors to the mighty Aksumite Empire. And as you walk, the land's story continues to unfold beneath your feet, pulling you deeper, step by step, into the heart of an ancient world, rising from its own awakening. You keep following the trail as it curls around the hillside, weaving you deeper into the memory of the highlands. The world shifts gradually, not abrupt, not cinematic, just that slow, steady transition you only notice when the air changes temperature and the earth feels more trodden. The path dips toward a cluster of stone structures. Their walls fitted so tightly it looks like the builders argued with every rock until it agreed to stay put. You step closer, and something in the way the shadows fall tells you you're rewalking into the long echo of kingdoms that knew exactly who they were. You brush your fingers against the stones, and they feel cool, stubborn, older than anything modern life throws at you. It's here that the whispers of the Aksumite Empire begin to stir, though you're not quite stepping into its grandeur yet. Uri in the middle ground, the stretch of centuries where Ethiopia's kingdoms practiced the art of existing with a sort of persistent, quiet resolve. This is where cultures harden like metal in a forge. You wander down a narrow lane between stone buildings. Somewhere nearby, a smith's hammer rings through the morning air, a rhythm so steady you consider sinking your footsteps to it. A woman passes with a woven basket on her back, balancing it as if defying gravity is just a normal Tuesday skill. The smell of roasted grain and earthy herbs wraps around you like a warm scarf, and your stomach grumbles in betrayal. Well done. You've walked into medieval Ethiopia with the appetite of someone who skipped dinner. A mainstream historical fact slips into your path long before money. European kingdoms formalized their courts. Ethiopia had deeply structured feudal systems, regional lords, landowning elites, and a network of allegiances that could rival a modern office's hierarchy chart minus the emails. These early systems influenced later Ethiopian governance for centuries, threading continuity through political upheavals, the way mountain rivers cut through stone. You enter a courtyard where travelers and messengers swap stories. A monk sits beneath a fig tree, his robes the color of dusted earth. He's writing on parchment, his movements precise, as if each letter contains a tiny universe. Your gaze drifts to the string of manuscripts around him, beautifully bound, layered with ink, prayers, and knowledge. It dawns on you that you're re-witnessing hints of the scholarly world that Ethiopia would become renowned for: monasteries, preserving traditions, translating texts, and building intellectual bridges to distant cultures. You sense the roots of a vast literary tradition quietly anchoring itself in this soil. One of the monks glances up at you and gestures to sit. You obey, mostly because your legs haven't forgiven the hike from Section 1. He offers you a small cup of something steaming. You take a sip. Your eyebrows attempt to leave your face. Congratulations. You've just met early Ethiopian coffee in its primordial, slightly chaotic form. It's strong enough to make your ancestors stand up straighter. You thank the monk, who nods with a serene expression that probably hides the thought. Amateurs, You wander on, passing carved wooden doors that gleam in the sun. The scent of incense drifts from a nearby chapel, and the low hum of chanting floats on the air like gentle vibrations. Ethiopia's spiritual identity is forming all around you, rituals older than many nations. Faith shaped by tradition and geographic isolation. You feel that weight. Not heavy, but grounding. Like a rhythm settling into your bones. A quirky tidbit sneaks in Some Medieval. Ethiopian soldiers were said to have carried shields, decorated not only with bright colors and patterns, but also with tufts of animal hair on the edge. Tiny fashion statements announcing, "I'm stylish and dangerous." You imagine yourself holding one, striking a pose, then immediately dropping it because your wrists clearly weren't built for medieval combat. As you continue walking, you step into a trading hub nestled along a dusty road. Merchants shout prices, goats bleat impatiently, and children dart between stalls, as if gravity is optional. You feel the buzz of commerce as goods shift from one hand to another. Pottery, spices, and bundles of dried herbs that look like they belong in a fantasy RPG inventory. You overhear two merchants arguing about distant lands one of them visited. But your ears perk up at a phrase you keep hearing again and again. The older merchant waves his hand dismissively. "The empire rises, the empire falls," he mutters, "but we still sell grain." The steady, matter-of-fact resilience is Ethiopia's superpower. You can feel it humming under every conversation. Historians still argue whether certain medieval Ethiopian kingdoms descended directly from Aksum's nobility, or emerged independently as later regional rulers claimed authority. You find yourself shrugging in solidarity with scholars everywhere. Then, pretending to jot a note in your non-existent research journal. The terrain stretches outward as you move beyond the hub-rolling plateaus carved with dry riverbeds and dotted with acacia trees. You spot a group of warriors on horseback galloping across the plains, their silhouettes crisp against the horizon. Their spears glint in the sunlight, and for a second you feel like an extra in a high-budget historical documentary. One rider slows as he passes, giving you a look that vaguely says, "Nice shoes, stranger," before thundering away. You follow the faint sound of water until you reach a small stream cutting neatly through a broad valley. People kneel along its edge, filling clay jars and washing clothing. A mother and daughter scrubbed fabric rhythmically, laughing at something you can't quite hear. You dip your hand into the cool water, feeling time ripple with the current. These valleys are living arteries. Every community, every kingdom depended on these water routes. And as the stream curls around your shoes, you sense shifts again. Ethiopia's kingdom's growing more complex, more fortified, more aware of the world beyond their mountains. You climb a ridge overlooking a fortress town, its walls rising like jagged teeth from the ground. Traders, monks, farmers, soldierettes, all moving, all dynamic. The machinery of a society with long-term goals and long-term memory. You step through its gates, pretending you belong, and no one stops you. Not because you're convincing more, because they're busy. And there, in the heart of this bustling world, you feel the drumbeat of Ethiopia's resolve. Kingdoms built, not on convenience, but on endurance. People who don't merely survive difficulties, they outlast them. Everything feels directed by a steady, ancient will. Preserve, protect, persist. A child runs past chasing a chicken. The chicken is winning, and you can't help but laugh. You're deep in history, but life is still. Life messy, loud, hopeful. As dusk dips the sky into a soft purple haze, torches flicker to life, painting warm glows across stone and earth. You breathe in the scent of smoke and distant cooking fires. This is a world in motion, a place bracing itself for the rise of one of Africa's greatest empires. And as you lean against the fortress wall, watching the stars pry open the night, you feel it: the next shift, the next chapter, the next ascent. Ethiopia's kingdoms of resolve are steadying themselves, preparing you for what waits just beyond these hills. You wake to the rumble of distant footsteps. Steady, deliberate, too synchronized to be anything except an army on the move. You blink away the haze of sleep. Yes, you accidentally dozed off against that fortress wall. No judgment, and the air around you feels sharper, charged with a tension that wasn't there a moment ago. The sky glows with the first slice of dawn, and the world seems to crack open at its seams as Ethiopia steps boldly into its collisions with empires. You follow a dusty road that leads toward the commotion. It curves around a ridge and suddenly widens into the outskirts of a grand city. Towering pillars, wide plazas, bustling houses carved into hillsides. It's not just a town, it's a heartbeat carved in stone. Axum. The name hums through your bones the way a deep drum does at a concert. You've arrived at the crossroads of ancient ambition. You slip into the flow of people entering the city, merchants with carts creaking under piles of goods, priests murmuring prayers under their breath, and soldiers marching with grim, unbothered focus. You try to blend in, though your posture probably screams confused time tourist. A passing guard gives you a skeptical look, but moves on when he decides you're too bewildered to be dangerous. Soon, you're swallowed by the city's pulse. The clang of metalworkers, the melodic chanting from temples, the chatter of dozens of languages mingling like overlapping streams. You catch fragments Greek, Arabic. This is a trading empire that doesn't just touch the world, it shakes hands with it. A mainstream historical fact unfolds right before your eyes. The Axumite Empire was so influential that its currency, actual gold, silver, and bronze, coins circulated across the Red Sea trade routes. You spot a merchant counting them, the little discs gleaming in his palm, each stamped with the profile of a king who looks like he's judging your posture. You drift toward the market, where stalls overflow with obsidian blades, ivory carvings, sacks of frankincense, baskets of dates, and textiles dyed in colors bright enough to make your wardrobe blush. The scents mingle sweet, smoky, sharp, and you feel your senses flipped like a switchboard. Someone pushes a cup into your hand. It's a warm drink infused with spices, richer than anything you've tasted before. You sip, sigh, and instantly declare it your new favorite beverage until you realize it contains enough caffeine to make a statue blink. You weave deeper into the city, drawn toward a cluster of towering structures. Massive steely loom overhead, taller, grander, more impossibly engineered than the ones from the highlands. These are Axum's giants, the architectural exclamation marks of an empire, convinced of its own destiny. A guide notices Yoruba and smirks. Knowingly, they say the greatest of these once stood over 30 meters tall, he says, then adds casually, historians still argue whether we used thousands of workers or something a bit more divine. He winks. You stare at the stone, half expecting it to wink back. You move on, descending toward the royal enclosure, a compound filled with the ruins of palaces that once housed kings, whose names echo through legends. Your footsteps crunch on gravel as you imagine regal banquets echoing through now empty halls. You linger at a broken column, its surface worn smooth by time and weather, and feel the faint vibration of voices from centuries ago. A sudden shout startles you. A group of soldiers rushes past, their armor clinking, their spears held firm. You follow at a safer distance, no need to test your cardio again. They stop at a massive gate where a royal emissary delivers news to the crowd. A foreign delegation has arrived from the Arabian Peninsula. You watch as a caravan enters, sleek camels, shimmering fabrics, dignitaries with poise sharp enough to cut stone. Gifts are exchanged, pleasantries offered, alliances hinted at. You can feel the swirl of diplomacy thick in the air, as layered and fragile as smoke. And then the tension shifts. A messenger bursts through the gathering, a young man covered in dust, panting, wild-eyed. Ships on the Red Sea, he gasps. Foreign banners. You don't need translation to understand. The era of easy alliances is ending. New powers rise far beyond the horizon, and Axum stands directly in their path. You find yourself pushed along as people surge toward the port. The salty wind slaps your face as the harbor opens before you, a maze of ships, cargo, and voices rising like waves. But your gaze locks onto a fleet lingering at a distance. Silhouettes, sharp and unfamiliar. Empires have been colliding for centuries. Rome, Persia, Saba, Axum. But this feels different. A shift, a tremor, a warning. Someone beside you mutters. The world grows restless. Another laughs, nervously. It always has. And yet, beneath the fear, there's something else humming in the Ethiopian air. Confidence. Defiant posture. That same stubborn, unbending will you've been walking alongside since the mountains. As trade routes shift and foreign religions spread, the empire adapts, absorbs, transforms. You wander into a church carved straight from a cliffside of the walls, cool under your palms. The faint echo of hymns dancing in the air. This spiritual anchor grows stronger as the political world trembles. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind from earlier. Some Axumites reportedly used powdered obsidian as a cosmetic eyeliner. So if someone in the crowd looks like they have the most intense eyes in history, that's not Magic Eats' volcanic rock fashion. A sudden commotion pulls you from your thought scholars, and diplomats are arguing near the water. The debate is heated, intense. You edge closer just in time to hear someone shout. Historians still argue whether our kingdom declined because of climate shifts, trade disruptions, or foreign invasions. But we stand either way, you mutter. Nice. Love a scholarly burn, earning a confused look from a man nearby. The world around you moves quickly now. Foreign merchants flood in, then retreat. Missionaries appear. New technologies emerge. Old alliances fracture. Axum, once the shining giant of the region, bends under pressure but does not break. You climb a rocky trail above the city, needing space to breathe. From up here, Axum looks eternal even, though you now know how fragile empires can be. The steely glitter in the low sun, shadows stretching toward the horizon. And yet, the land doesn't feel defeated. It feels watchful, preparing. Somewhere in the layers of this history, a new Ethiopia is forming. Lesan NPR. More a nation forged in the fires of resistance. You take one last look at the city before turning toward the road that leads into the final stretch of this journey, where modern colonizers arrive expecting an easy victory, unaware that these mountains swallow invaders like snacks, and you're about to walk straight into the heat of that last stand. You follow the winding road out of Axum as the morning sun stretches long golden beams across the mountains, each one sliding gently over ridges, as if waking them from centuries of patient waiting. Your footsteps feel heavier now, not with exhaustion, but with the weight of everything you've seen. You step into a new era, one where the world's ambitions turn sharply toward Africa, and colonial powers begin scanning maps with greedy fingers. But Ethiopia is already bracing its shoulders. The landscape shifts as you descend into lower valleys broad, warm plains where acacia trees stand like watchful silhouettes. You hear distant bells echoing from herds of goats and cattle, each sound vibrating through the still morning air. A caravan winds past you, traders moving briskly, muttering about rumors trickling in from the coast, unfamiliar ships, foreign uniforms, and a gathering sense of looming pressure. The world is shrinking, they say. Empires are no longer distant threats, but creeping shadows. You walk on, feeling that shadow, too. But with every step, you're reminded that this land has a long memory and an even longer backbone. Up ahead, a small stone church clings to a cliffside, its doorway carved with symbols that look like they've been kissed by 1,000 sunrises. Pilgrims chant softly near the entrance, their voices weaving into the wind. You stop for a moment to listen, letting the sound settle into your chest. It's grounding, ancient, stubbornly peaceful. Everything Ethiopia is at its core. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. In the late 19th century, Europe tried to divide Africa like slices of cake at a party. But Ethiopia, alongside Liberia, and you picture a group of European diplomats pointing at a map before realizing Ethiopia wasn't exactly the type to be claimed. You chuckle, imagining the awkward silence in that room. The road bends toward a bustling town where preparations are underway. Soldiers, polished mismatched rifles, blacksmiths' hammer blades with sparks leaping into the air, and couriers sprint between buildings with rolled parchments tucked under their arms. A general stands in the center, issuing orders with a voice that could probably command a mountain to move. You recognize the tension immediately. This place is getting ready for something big. And then you hear it, the name that shifts the air like a drumbeat. Menelik, the Emperor of Ethiopia, the strategist, the listener, the negotiator. the man who will soon stare down a European empire without blinking. You slip into the crowd surrounding his encampment. Menelik II stands tall, wrapped in a cloak that moves like flowing night. His eyes scan the horizon, thoughtful and sharp, calculating risks and outcomes the way you calculate how much energy you have left before bed. His advisors cluster around him, voices low but urgent. A courier arribas breathless, announcing that Italy is tightening its grip on Eritrea and pressing into Ethiopian territory. You feel the ripple of anger move through the camp, subtle but powerful like a lion flicking its tail. A scholar near you mutters, "Historians still argue whether Italy genuinely believed Ethiopia would accept their protectorate treaty, or whether it was all ambition." He sighs, shaking his head. "Either way, they grossly underestimated us." You raise your eyebrows, silently agreeing that underestimate is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. You wander between rows of soldiers preparing for the inevitable. The air is thick with sweat, determination, and the faint smell of spiced stew bubbling in a pot nearby. You watch a young fighter awkwardly adjusting his uniform, only to have an older soldier smack his hand away and fix it properly. A tiny moment of mentorship in the middle of chaos. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Some Ethiopian fighters reportedly wore bright charms or small scrolls containing protective prayers tucked into their clothing before battle. You imagine yourself doing the same, except yours would say something like, "Please let me not trip in front of important people." The camp buzzes with movement. Horses snort impatiently. Scouts gallop in with new intel. Drums echo across the valley, rallying distant units. Menelik moves through his troops, speaking to them in measured tones, reminding them not just of strategy, but of identity. Ethiopia has been its own sovereign force for millennia. They fight for lineage, for mountains older than maps, for stories carved deeper than borders. You follow the army as it begins to march across rocky ground, toward the fated location Adwa. The terrain sharpens, growing harsher, more jagged. The rhythm of thousands of feet stomping in unison rumbles through the earth. Your own heartbeat syncs with it, fast and anxious. Soldiers chant as they move, voices steady even as tension coils around the rising sun. You crest a ridge and finally see it. Wide valleys stretching below like open hands, cliffs forming natural battlements, and the faint glint of Italian encampments in the distance. The battlefield of 1896. The last stand before freedom. Night falls, draping the mountains in deep blue shadows. Fires flicker across both sides of the valley. You walk among the Ethiopian soldiers as they eat, sharpen blades, whisper prayers, or sit completely still in quiet contemplation. A young warrior looks up at you, his eyes fierce yet steady. "Tomorrow," he says simply, "we defend what no one gave us." Dawn slashes across the horizon like a blade, and the world erupts. You're pulled into the roar of movement, soldiers racing down slopes, horns blaring wildly, the thunder of hooves cracking against stone. Italian artillery booms, echoing like distant storms. You duck behind a boulder while dust and adrenaline swirl around you. But Ethiopia moves with terrifying unity. General Res Alula commands with precision, flanking maneuvers unfolding across ridges like dark wings. Menelik's strategic positioning forces the Italians into disastrous confusion. The Ethiopian troops surge with a power that feels both current and ancient, like the highlands themselves are marching with them. And somehow, in the chaos, you keep moving. You catch glimpses of the battle's turning moments. An Italian regiment, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Ethiopian fighters reclaiming captured artillery. The scream of commands lost beneath drums. You stumble, regain balance. Stumble again, look. It's chaotic, and cling to a boulder as the tide shifts, unmistakably toward Ethiopia. When the dust finally settles, the valley goes eerily quiet. The victory at Adwa isn't just a win, it's a shockwave. Ethiopia has defeated a European empire on open ground, a global first in the age of colonization, and you feel it in your bones. This land resisted because it always has, because surrender doesn't exist in its vocabulary. As the soldiers celebrate, chanting triumph into the sky, Menelik stands tall on a ridgecombe, resolute. Ethiopia remains uncolonized, free, enduring, exactly as the mountains intended. You exhale, shaky from everything you've seen. the journey slows. The adrenaline thins, and the night begins to soften its edges around you. The noise of the battlefield fades gently as you step away from the ridge, letting the soft hush of evening wrap itself around you like a blanket. The air cools, drifting lazily through the tall grasses, carrying only the faintest echoes of distant voices winding down after a long victorious day. Each breath feels slower now, deeper, as though your lungs finally remember what calm feels like after so much movement. You take a few steps farther into the valley, where the shadows stretch long and smooth across the earth. The sky deepens into a warm indigo, the first stars appearing like tiny lanterns guiding you back to yourself. The mountains, so fierce and sharp in the morning light, now soften into gentle silhouettes, steady guardians, settling in for the night. Their presence is reassuring, familiar, a reminder that some things are constant even as the world shifts around them. Your footsteps become quieter, your body lighter, as if each moment eases you 1 degree closer to rest. You imagine the whispers of ancient stories floating on the breeze dailies of resilience, of empires risen and fallen, of people who held their ground with quiet strength. They drift around you with a calming rhythm, like waves brushing softly against the shore. The last curls of smoke fade from the campfires behind you, leaving only the gentle hum of crickets and the low, distant rustle of wind brushing over the grass. You let the sounds blend together, smoothing into a soft, steady lullaby that tugs gently at your eyelids. And as you stand there between fading starlight, warm earth, and the comforting silence of a land at peace, you let the story settle inside you, steady and quiet, until all that's left is the soft drift toward sleep.